Dungeons & Dragons has long been rumored to have connections with satanic cults, self-harm, and even murder. And while most of this just boils down to religious fear-mongering, there has been one case of homicide that's actually connected to the game. Today we're going to talk about that one real-life campaign that went very, very wrong. On the morning of July 5th, 1988, police responded to an anonymous call in Washington, North Carolina, and were dispatched to the Smallwood subdivision home of Leith Peter von Stein. They knocked on the ornate mahogany doors of von Stein's home, but no one answered. After a few minutes of no responses, they resorted to breaking down the door, fearing that something horrible had truly happened. There was seemingly no one on the lower level to notice the intrusion, so they made their way upstairs to find the mutilated bodies of the homeowner and his wife, Bonnie. Leith Peter von Stein was already dead, his body beaten beyond recognition by a blunt object and covered in numerous cuts from what police assumed was a small blade. His wife, however, would survive, despite her gruesome injuries. In a room nearby, they found the von Steins' 18-year-old daughter, Angela, who had seemingly slept through the entire encounter. She was brought in for questioning. As police searched the upper levels of the house, they discovered signs that pointed to robbery. A busted window, drawers opened in the bedroom, some jewelry missing. Police noted that it seemed odd for this level of brutality to be connected to a simple robbery. And furthermore, they noticed odd discrepancies. Some jewelry had been taken, but most of it was left behind, with seemingly little care given to the actual value of the items stolen. Police also eventually noticed glass outside, and realized that the window that had been busted was actually broken from the inside, and furthermore plainly wasn't locked in the first place. Signs seemingly pointed to the murderer staging the crime scene so that it would appear to be a robbery. The von Stein's daughter, Angela, seemed to be completely horrified and dumbfounded by the murder. Despite investigators interrogating her for hours, they never saw any indication from her that she had anything to do with the murder. While it was clearly suspicious that she had slept through such a brutal attack, it soon came to light that the girl had a history of drug addiction, which could definitely have played a part in her sleeping a little more deeply than the average person. Police were baffled. Clearly this was an inside job, but the only logical suspect appeared by all accounts to be wholly innocent. The von Steins had a son as well, Christopher, but at the time of the murder he was away at the student residencies of the North Carolina University, with multiple people able to back up his alibi for the night. Angela and Christopher, who both had the surname Pritchard, were actually only stepchildren to Leith Peter von Stein. Their mother, Bonnie, had remarried Leith in their early years, and it was said that both the children had a very difficult relationship with their stepfather. Police, however, did not see this as motive enough for the murder. Although, authorities would soon learn that the von Steins' assets totaled up to over $2 million. This, they thought, could definitely be motive for murder. When the mother, Bonnie, regained consciousness from the assault, she told investigators what she could remember of her attacker. She described him as a man in an unusual mask, wielding a knife and a club. She awoke to find him slamming the club down on Leith's already dead body, again and again. It was likely the sound of his bones snapping that had actually woken her up. She tried to flee, but the attacker began beating and stabbing her as well until she eventually lost consciousness. This vague depiction of the murderer gave detectives very little to go on, and suspects were quickly being ruled out. However, soon the police would catch a lucky break. A nearby hog farmer called to report that he had happened to spot a fire in the woods outside his house around the time of the murder. A hunting knife, some clothing, and a scrap of paper with a map of the von Steins' neighborhood were recovered from the remains of the fire. The map was curious and drawn out in the form of a grid. Police had never seen anything like this before. For nearly a year, the investigation drew on before something caught investigators' attention. In an attempt to rule out suspects, authorities had begun giving polygraphs to those associated with the crime. Bonnie, the wife, and Angela, the daughter, took their test willingly and showed no irregularities. Christopher, the son, however, adamantly refused to take the test. Police began investigating him much more closely following this. Through conversations with fellow students, an unusual picture of Christopher was painted. He was described as a character, strange, weird, and off the wall. He was the kind who was always trying to prove something, one friend said. He was a dreamer too, filled with big plans for the future that regularly bubbled out of him, but some friends wondered how he would ever accomplish such grand schemes. He also seemed to have one hobby that regularly took up his time: dungeons and Dragons. Christopher started playing the game regularly with 2 other students at MCU after he stumbled upon a flyer they posted in the dorm lobby offering free beer to anyone who joined their campaign. He went straight to the 8th floor and introduced himself to the dungeon master, James Bartlett Upchurch III, who wanted friends to call him Moog. He quickly struck up a close friendship with Upchurch and the other player, Neil Henderson, and started playing weekly with the duo. Police started pressing Neil and Upchurch about the murder, and to their surprise, Neil broke down and confessed. He claimed that he had driven Upchurch to the Von Stein residence at the prompting of Christopher, so that Upchurch could murder Leith and Bonnie, and Christopher could inherit their wealth. Naturally, police were astonished that Christopher had been able to manipulate his 2 seemingly very normal friends into committing such violent acts. Apparently, Christopher was also quite the manipulator. By all accounts, he was charismatic and resourceful, able to pull people into the excitement of his great schemes, even though they rarely went anywhere. Christopher was a talker, not a doer. While Neil and Upchurch were far from model citizens, over time, Christopher slowly started pushing them to harder and harder substances. On one occasion, he arrived for D&D and held aloft a bag of cocaine, marijuana, and cash, proclaiming, "Fellows, this is power." He also pushed the pair to explore the sewers below the university, and occasionally even game down there. It was on one such occasion, in the dark tunnels, that the idea of murdering his parents was first pitched by Christopher. He revealed to his friends that his parents had money. Then, he coerced them into talking about all of the incredible things they could buy if they had that much money. Cars, pools, drugs. And then, he pitched his plan, which, if successful, would give him an alibi, the police would have no logical leads, and in a few months he could share the money with the 2. At first, they did resist the idea, but Christopher was quite persuasive, promising more and more until they finally agreed. Using the same paper and format the group used to set up encounters for Dungeons & Dragons, Christopher mapped out the neighborhood and the house itself. For this murder, Christopher would be the dungeon master. His plan was simple. Himself, being the most likely suspect, would stay at the dorms, making sure others saw him all throughout the night. This would give him an airtight alibi. Meanwhile, Neil would drive Upchurch to the Von Stein residence, where he could sneak into the home and complete the gruesome murder. With the map created and the plan laid out, they could run encounters, the same as they might in Dungeons & Dragons, to test how Upchurch and Neil could respond in different scenarios. What if the sister woke up? What if Bonnie was downstairs getting a drink of water? What if they managed to pull a weapon on Upchurch? Slowly but surely, they ironed out the plan. The 3 would later admit that they got lost in the fantasy, and thinking in terms of the game they played made it seem less real to them. So I'll do my best to describe the murder the way they would have imagined it, even though it might seem a little morbid. The session would start at around midnight after the boys had taken a long rest in preparation for the encounters ahead. Upchurch, wielding 2 simple martial weapons, a club and a dagger, infiltrated the house that night with a key provided by Christopher, allowing him to bypass a lockpick check. He succeeded on his stealth check as well, succeeded in waking no one as he made his way to the bedroom. He opened the door and moved beside the bed. Initiative was rolled, but Upchurch had a surprise round as the sleeping couple had not yet noticed the intruder until he attacked. He managed to kill Leith before Bonnie awoke and tried to escape, but unfortunately for her, Upchurch got an attack of opportunity and knocked her out with a single blow. Assuming the couple was dead, he set about making the crime scene look like a robbery, pocketing random jewelry and busting open a window. His low wisdom modifier didn't allow him to realize that the scene looked staged. The police's insight would see right through the charade. He left the house and returned to Neil in the car, and after a semi-successful survival check to burn the evidence, the 2 fled and relayed the information to Christopher, who was elated. The plan had worked, just like the games they played. However, Christopher hadn't expected a few twists in this encounter. First, and most damning for receiving his inheritance, was that his mother, Bonnie, had passed her death saving throws and was able to be stabilized by medics. He also sorely misjudged how perceptive the police would be, and last but not least, he assumed that his friend, Neil Henderson, would not be able to be intimidated by the police. He was wrong. Neil confessed the entire plot to detectives and admitted to driving Upchurch to the home to commit the murder. All 3 were arrested. Effectively, it was a TPK. The trial took place in January 1990. Christopher Pritchard, who, subsequent to his arrest, admitted to masterminding the murder conspiracy, and Neil Henderson, who said his role was that of James Upchurch's lookout and getaway driver, pleaded guilty to reduced charges as part of a plea bargain whereby they both testified against Upchurch. Upchurch, who denied all charges, was found guilty of first-degree murder, assault with a deadly weapon with intent to kill or seriously injure, conspiracy to commit murder, and burglary in the first degree. For these crimes, he was sentenced respectively to death, 20 years, 6 years, and life. Upchurch's death sentence was set aside on October 1st, 1992, and he was resentenced to life imprisonment. He only became eligible for parole this year in 2022. Pritchard was convicted of aiding and abetting and second-degree murder and was sentenced to life imprisonment. He also received a 20-year sentence for aiding and abetting the assault on his mother, Bonnie von Stein. He was paroled on June 2nd, 2007. After his release, Christopher would speak very candidly of that point in his life. "It took a long time for me to get my head screwed on straight," he said. "I'm going to be honest with you now. After I committed the crime and the reality of what I had done actually set in, because I was really living in a fantasy world. But when you do wrong, you're supposed to be punished. That's the bottom line. That's how it works." And that's the true story of the only murder really connected to Dungeons & Dragons. Now, if this video has in any way made you think that Dungeons & Dragons is dangerous, let me assure you that it is not. Trust me when I say that you can find at least one murder associated with literally anything. This doesn't prove anything. Dungeons & Dragons is a role-playing game. That's all. I mean, I would know better than anyone. I've been playing for years. I play weekly. But this story is an example of the exception, and ultimately it was drug use and envy that took the life of Leith von Stein that night, not Gary Gygax. At some point I may do a video about why Dungeons & Dragons came to be so villainized by Christian conservatives over the years, but trust me when I say it's all nonsense. And a lot of it boils down to one religiously charged comic book called Dark Dungeons by Jack Chick in 1984. Anyways, thank you for watching. If you know anyone who's into Dungeons & Dragons, make sure you share this, and please like and subscribe. Really helps our channel. We're Three Gnomes in the Dark, and we'll see you in our next video.